I was standing in the middle of the living room, and the only thing on my mind was the laundry. It sounds so small now, but that was my whole world at 4 o'clock last Thursday. Leo was on the rug with those wooden trucks his grandpa built for him. He was making these little engine noises, just deep in his own world, and I was trying to match up socks. The humidity in Wisconsin that day was thick. It was the kind of heat that sits on your shoulders like a heavy coat, and even with the AC humming, I could feel the dampness in the air. I had the basket balanced on my hip, full of Leo's little grass-stained t-shirts and my husband's work jeans. I remember looking down at Leo and thinking how much he's grown just this summer. His hair was sticking up in the back like it always does. I reached into the basket for a pair of his little green socks, the ones with the dinosaurs on them, and that's when the floor just stopped being there. It wasn't a sharp pain. It wasn't like I'd been hit. It was more like someone had reached inside my chest and pulled a plug. Everything just went hollow. I felt my knees buckle, and my first thought wasn't that I was dying. My first thought was that I couldn't fall on Leo. I had to move the laundry basket so I didn't hurt him. I remember the basket tipping. I watched the clean clothes spill out across the carpet, and it felt like it took 20 minutes for those t-shirts to hit the floor. I saw Leo look up. His little face went from happy to confused in a second. I wanted to tell him to go get his dad, but my voice was gone. It was like my throat had been filled with sand. I hit the carpet, and the last thing I saw in my house was one of those dinosaur socks lying right next to my hand. I couldn't even move my finger to touch it. Then the room started to stretch. The walls just pulled away until the living room was a tiny box a mile away, and I was sliding out into the dark. I'm Elsie. I've been sitting with stories like Heather's for a long time now, stories that people send into near-death experiences. And the thing that stopped me when I first heard her account was that detail about the dinosaur socks. We hear a lot about the big moments, the lights and the visions, but we don't always talk about the laundry basket left on the floor. It's the part nobody really asks about. The half-finished tasks that just stop mid-motion. It makes me wonder about the things we're doing when life just pauses. Most of us are just doing the dishes or folding clothes. I've noticed a pattern in a few other stories I've gathered, where people remember one tiny, ordinary thing with more clarity than the actual medical event. Someone once told me about a cracked tile in their kitchen they were staring at while their heart stopped. Heather had the dinosaur socks and the thought of Leo on the rug. I'm still turning over why our minds hold on to those small pieces of home right at the edge of the end. Maybe it's a way to keep us anchored for a second longer. And that gap between the laundry basket and whatever comes next is the thing I keep trying to understand. Heather's story does something different with that gap. Listen to how the room changed for her as she moved further away from Leo. The dark wasn't cold. It was just empty. For a second, I could still hear the muffled sound of my husband running into the room. I could hear him yelling my name, and I could hear Leo starting to cry. That sound broke my heart. I wanted to reach back through the floor and pick him up. I'm 35, and I'm pregnant with our second, and all I could think about was how Leo needed his mom and the baby needed to breathe. But I couldn't get back. I was in this gray space. It felt like standing in a thick fog in a field back home, where you know the barn is right there, but you can't see the wood or the handle. The air felt heavy, almost solid, like I was moving through water. I wasn't scared for myself, but I was terrified for Leo. I kept saying his name in my head, over and over, like a prayer. Then the light arrived. It didn't flash. It just grew like the sun coming up over the trees on a summer morning. It was warm. It felt like stepping out of a cold lake into the sun. I felt myself being pulled toward it, and as I got closer, the gray fog just dissolved. I was in a tunnel, but it wasn't made of stone. It was made of moving air and light, and somehow it felt alive. At the end of it, I stepped out into a garden. The first thing that hit me was the color. I've lived in Wisconsin all my life, and I've seen the woods in the spring, but this was different. The grass was a green so deep and bright it almost didn't look real. The trees had leaves that looked like they were holding on to the sun. Everything felt more real than my living room had. It felt like the world I'd left was just a shadow, and this was the actual thing. And then I saw him. He was standing near a path of white stones. He wasn't some distant figure. He was right there. I knew it was Jesus immediately. I didn't have to see a face I recognized from a painting. I just knew him by the way the air felt around him. It was the kind of peace that makes you forget you ever had a worry in your life. I forgot about the laundry. I even for a moment stopped panicking about Leo. He walked toward me, and he looked at me with so much love I thought I might come apart. He took my hand, and his skin was warm. He looked exactly like a man, but he was also so much more. He said, "Heather, it's not time for you to stay. But I have things I need you to understand. I need you to see the truth garden." We started walking, and as we moved through the trees, I could see things I couldn't see before. He told me that his children were opening doors they didn't understand. He said the enemy uses gifts to get into people's lives, things they accept without thinking. He told me there were 6 kinds of these gifts, and he would show them to me one at a time so I could carry each one back. He showed me a vision right there in the grass. It was like a window opened up. I saw a woman receiving a beautiful carved mask from a friend who'd been traveling. It was bright and looked like a piece of art. But Jesus squeezed my hand, and I saw the spirit world. Attached to that mask were these thin, dark threads that started to wrap around the woman's walls the moment she hung it up. He told me, "Heather, when my people bring items into their homes that were made for worshiping other gods or for rituals they don't understand, they are giving away their protection. They think it's just a decoration, but it's a legal ground, an open door that quietly lets the darkness in." I thought about Leo and our house. I thought about all the things we've collected. Jesus looked at me, and he wasn't angry. He was just so serious. He told me that anything connected to the occult or false worship carries a shadow. He mentioned a warning from Deuteronomy about never bringing something cursed into your home because it can pull you into the same trouble it carries. He said his followers have to be more careful. Then he showed me a second kind of gift. He called it items that make your spirit feel restless. He showed me another window. A man was being given an expensive watch. It was a nice gift, but the man felt a knot in his stomach when he put it on. He didn't know why, so he just ignored it. He didn't want to be rude. But Jesus told me that the unrest in our spirit is his warning. He said, "I go ahead of you. I see the heart of the person giving the gift. If I make you feel heavy about something, you have to listen." He told me many of his children are struggling with anxiety and nightmares and fights in their homes because they have these objects sitting on their shelves. They pray for peace, but they're keeping the very thing that's inviting the turmoil. I looked at Jesus and I asked about Leo. I asked if these things could hurt my son. He looked at me with such tenderness and said, "I am showing you this so you can protect him. You are the gatekeeper of your home, Heather." Jesus didn't move fast, but we seemed to cover a lot of ground in that garden. He still had hold of my hand, and honestly, that was the only thing keeping me steady. I kept thinking about Leo back on that rug in Wisconsin. I kept thinking about how he's just a little boy and how he trusts me to keep the bad stuff out. I felt this rush of, I don't know, it was like a mother's instinct, but it was amplified. I wanted to run back through that tunnel and start throwing things out of my house. But Jesus stopped me by a tree that had these deep, red fruits. He looked at me and said, "Heather, there is a third gift you must never accept." He called them generational items. The window opened in the air again. I saw a house that looked a lot like the ones in my neighborhood. Inside, there was a young couple, and they were putting an old, heavy wooden chest in their bedroom. It looked like an antique, something beautiful that had been passed down. Jesus told me it had belonged to the wife's great-grandmother. But then the truth part of the garden kicked in. The chest started to look different. It didn't look like wood anymore. It looked like it was pulsing. And above it, I saw those dark threads again, but these were thicker. They looked like heavy cables. Jesus told me that the great-grandmother had been involved in things she shouldn't have, secret societies and rituals that weren't of him. He used a word that stuck with me. He said these items are like antennas. They're sitting in the corner of a room, looking pretty, but they are constantly broadcasting a signal into the spirit world. They're saying, "This family is still connected to the old ways. This family still belongs to the dark. I saw the couple in that house. They were Christians. They loved the Lord. But they couldn't figure out why their marriage was so full of anger. They couldn't figure out why they felt so depressed every time they walked into that bedroom. Jesus showed me that the spirit that had been in the great-grandmother's house was now in theirs, because they'd invited it in through that chest. The cross breaks the curse, Jesus said, and his voice had this edge to it, like a sword hitting stone. But my children must still choose to be separate. You cannot keep the furniture of the enemy and expect my full blessing on your home. I thought about the old jewelry box my aunt gave me. I thought about the things tucked away in my basement. I felt this weight in my stomach. I realized that being a gatekeeper for Leo meant I had to look at everything my family had ever given me. It wasn't about being mean to my relatives. It was about protecting my son from things that had been following my family for 100 years. That word, antenna, is what got me. People talk about cursed objects or things that just felt wrong to them, but I've never heard it put quite like that. A physical item broadcasting a signal. It makes so much sense, in a strange way. We think of an object as just being there, but if it was used for something dark, why wouldn't it still carry that connection? I've gotten a few stories from people who realized their family homes were full of these antennas. One woman wrote in about an old mirror she inherited that seemed to bring a cloud of sadness into every room she put it in. She didn't know the history of it, but she knew how she felt. When she finally got rid of it, the cloud lifted. It makes me wonder if we're a lot more connected to our ancestors than we realize, not just through our hair color or the way we laugh, but through the things they held in their hands. Heather's reaction here is so honest. She isn't thinking about the value of the antique, she's thinking about Leo. That's the mother part of this that I keep coming back to. But Jesus wasn't finished. The next thing he showed her was something every one of us has to deal with at some point. Money, and it wasn't what I expected. The garden shifted again. We were standing by a stream now, and the water was so clear it didn't even look like water. It looked like liquid light. But Jesus pointed to a place on the bank where the grass was brown and shriveled. He told me this was the fourth gift he wanted me to see, and it was one almost everyone welcomes without a second thought. He showed me a vision of a woman being offered a gift of money, a lot of money, from a friend. The friend told her it was a blessing, a reward for being such a good person. The woman was so happy. She thought her prayers had been answered. She used the money to take her family on a trip. But as I watched, the water in the stream near the woman turned dark. Jesus told me that the money had been stolen. It had been taken through lies and cheating. He called it the reward of iniquity, a prize built on somebody else's pain. He said, Heather, even if you didn't do the wrong thing yourself, when you accept a gift that has dirty roots, you become linked to that sin. You are eating the fruit of a tree I've already set aside as wrong. He showed me that this woman's life started to feel defiled. It was like a film of grease had been wiped over everything she touched. Her prayers felt like they were hitting a ceiling. She hadn't committed the crime, but by enjoying the prize, she had given the enemy a way to whisper to her soul that she was just as guilty. My children must have clean hands, Jesus said. If a gift feels like it's coming from an unrighteous place, do not touch it. I would rather you have nothing than have a house full of things that have been stolen from others. I thought about how easy it is to just take things because we think we deserve a break. I thought about how I'd feel if I found out Leo's college fund was built on someone else's pain. It made me feel sick. Then he moved to the fifth gift. He called these items from painful memories. This one hit me hard. He showed me a woman who had been through a really bad divorce. Her ex-husband had been cruel to her. But she still had this one necklace he'd given her. It was expensive, and it was pretty, so she kept it. But every time she put it on, she felt that old rejection. She felt that old sadness. Jesus looked at the necklace in the vision, and I saw that it was acting like an anchor. It was literally dragging behind her in the spirit world, keeping her stuck in that season of pain. These items give tormenting spirits an open door into your life, Jesus explained. They keep the wounds open. You think you are just keeping a piece of jewelry, but you are keeping the memory of the abuse alive in your home. You are telling your heart that you aren't really free yet. I thought about a box of letters I had in my closet from a time in my life when I was very lost and very hurt. I realized those letters weren't memories. They were chains. They were keeping me from being the mom Leo needs me to be, because a part of me was always looking back at that dark time. Jesus said, "Heather, healing requires letting go. If there is something in your house that brings back the smell of the fire you walked through, throw it away. Do not keep the symbols of your captivity." The idea of trauma anchors is something that really stayed with me after I read Heather's account. We're taught to be sentimental, aren't we? We're taught to hold on to things because that was a part of my life. But Jesus is saying something very different here. He's saying that some memories don't need a physical object to represent them, especially if those objects are pulling us back into the dark. I keep thinking about whether that's why some people feel like they can't move forward. They've done the therapy, they've prayed the prayers, but they still have the necklace or the letters sitting on their nightstand. It's like trying to run a race while you're still holding onto the starting block. I genuinely like to know, have you ever had an object like that? Something that wasn't evil in itself, but every time you looked at it, you felt the old weight? And if you got rid of it, did the air in the room change? I want to know if that anchor feeling is as real for you as Heather saw it was in the garden. There was one more gift Jesus wanted to show her, and this one was about the future. It was about the choices we make when we think we're finally making it. The garden felt like it was getting brighter, like the sun was moving directly overhead. Jesus led me to a path that overlooked a vast, dark valley. It was the first time I'd seen anything in that place that wasn't beautiful. He pointed down into the valley, and I saw people being offered opportunities. I saw a man being offered a promotion at work, a really big one. He'd be famous. He'd have all the money he ever wanted. But the condition was that he had to stop talking about Jesus. He had to tone it down so he wouldn't offend the people at the top. Jesus called this the sixth gift, items that compromise your integrity. He said, "Heather, the most expensive gift in the world is not worth your soul." He reminded me of when he was in the wilderness and the enemy offered him all the kingdoms of the world. "The enemy will offer you the world to make you bow," Jesus said. His voice was like a lion's roar now, echoing across that valley. "My children are accepting gifts of position and fame and comfort, but they are paying for them with their holiness. They are trading their eternal destiny for a moment of pleasure." I saw a young girl being offered a chance to be a star, but she had to dress in a way that didn't honor her body. I saw a man being offered a deal that would make him rich, but he had to lie about a competitor. Every time one of them accepted the gift, I saw their light go out. It was like a candle being snuffed. They still looked successful on the outside, but in the truth garden, they looked like shadows. "Tell my people," Jesus said, and he turned me to face him. He was holding both of my hands now. "Tell them to be shrewd. Tell them that a bribe blinds the eyes. If a gift requires you to hide who I am, it is not a gift from me." I thought about my life in Wisconsin. I'm just a mom. I don't have people offering me record deals or millions of dollars. But I thought about the small ways I compromise, the times I stay quiet when I should speak, the gifts of being liked or being comfortable. I looked at Jesus and I felt so small. I felt like I'd failed him 1,000 times, but he just leaned down and kissed my forehead. It felt like a drop of warm oil hitting my skin. "You are going back now, Heather," he said. "You have to tell them. The doors are open, and my children are sleeping. Wake them up." I felt the pull then. The garden started to blur. I wanted to stay. I wanted to keep holding his hand. I thought about Leo and I knew I had to go, but the thought of leaving that peace was almost more than I could take. "I am with you," he whispered. "Even in the laundry, even in the humidity, I am there." And then the garden exploded into white. The white light didn't just fade, it snapped. 1 second I was standing in the most beautiful place I'd ever seen, holding the hand of Jesus, and the next second I was slamming back into a body that felt like it was made of lead. The first thing I felt was the cold. It was a sharp, clinical cold that made my teeth chatter. Then came the noise. The steady rhythm I'd heard in the garden was gone, replaced by the frantic beeping of machines and the sound of someone shouting, "Clear!" I felt a jolt go through my chest, a hard electric kick that made my whole frame jump. It hurt, and the first breath I pulled in was sharp and shaky. My lungs were raw, and my heart was thumping in an uneven, unsteady way, like it was still trying to find its rhythm again. I opened my eyes, and everything was blurry. The lights in the hospital ceiling were too bright, and they didn't have any of the warmth of the garden. They were just yellow and harsh. I saw a doctor leaning over me, his face tight with stress. I saw my husband in the corner of the room, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I tried to say Leo's name. I needed to know if he was okay. I needed to know if he was still on that rug with his trucks. But I couldn't get the sound out. I just coughed, and a nurse put an oxygen mask over my face. "She's back," I heard someone say. "We've got a rhythm." That was 4 days ago, Thursday night. I spent the next 3 days in a hospital bed, being poked and prodded while doctors talked about pulmonary embolisms and miraculous recoveries. They told me my heart had stopped for almost 8 minutes. They told me I was lucky to be alive. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt heavy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark threads Jesus had shown me. I saw the antennas and the anchors. While the doctors were checking my blood pressure, I was thinking about my closet. While they were monitoring the baby, who is doing fine, thank God, a little fighter just like her brother, I was making a list in my head. I got home yesterday afternoon. My husband carried me into the house because I'm still so weak I can barely stand for more than a minute. Leo was there, waiting by the door. When he saw me, he didn't run to me at first. He just stood there with his thumb in his mouth, looking at me like I was a stranger. It killed me. I realized he'd seen me fall. He'd seen the life go out of his mom right in front of him. I sat on the sofa, the same one I'd collapsed next to, and I pulled him into my lap. He smelled like maple syrup and dirt, and he felt so solid and real. I held him until he fell asleep, and then I looked around my living room. The humidity was still there, hanging in the corners of the house, but it felt like something else was sitting there too. Now that I'd been to the Truth Garden, I could feel the restlessness Jesus had talked about. I looked at a mask my sister had brought back from her trip to Haiti 3 years ago. It was hanging right over the television. I'd always thought it was interesting. Now, looking at it, I felt a physical weight on my chest. I felt like the air around that mask was thick and greasy. I called my husband in. I told him, "That mask has to go, now." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Heather, you just got home. You need to rest." "I can't rest," I told him. "Not with that in here." There is something so raw about that moment. Heather is barely out of the hospital. Her body is still recovering from a massive trauma, and her first instinct isn't to sleep or to eat. It's to clean. It reminds me of a few other accounts I've heard where people come back with a very specific, almost urgent mission to change their environment. One man told me that when he came back, he couldn't stand the smell of his own house until he threw away a specific set of old books he'd been keeping. He couldn't explain why, just that they felt wrong to him now. I'm curious about that shift in perception. When Heather was in the garden, Jesus gave her a new way to see, and she didn't lose it when she stepped back into her living room in Wisconsin. She could still feel the grease on the air. It makes me wonder if our homes are much more crowded than we realize. We think we're alone, but we're surrounded by the weight of the things we've chosen to keep. Heather didn't stop with the mask. She spent the rest of that evening, her first night home, doing exactly what she felt Jesus had asked her to do. I made my husband walk through the house with a big black garbage bag. I couldn't do much, but I pointed, and he moved. We went into the bedroom. I told him to get that old jewelry box from the back of the closet, the one from my grandmother that I always felt off about. I told him to find that box of letters I'd been keeping from my early 20s. He didn't understand. He kept saying, "Heather, these are memories. You're going to regret this when you're feeling better." "I'm feeling better than I've ever felt," I told him. "I'm finally seeing the truth." I told him about the Truth Garden. I told him about the antennas and the anchors. I told him that I wouldn't let anything broadcast a signal of darkness over Leo's head. I wouldn't let my son grow up in a house where the enemy had legal ground just because I was too sentimental to throw away a piece of wood or a scrap of paper. We filled 3 bags. We found things I hadn't thought about in years. A good luck charm a friend had given me that always made me feel anxious. A book on meditation that focused on emptying the mind to let other things in. A set of expensive wine glasses we'd received from a person who had tried to ruin my husband's career. Every time a bag went out the front door, the air in the house felt thinner. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like the Wisconsin humidity was finally breaking. I could breathe easier. My heart didn't feel so cramped in my ribs. By the time we were done, it was late. Leo was tucked into bed, and the house was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the heavy, silent quiet of before. It felt like a house that was finally holding its breath in a good way. I'm still weak. My legs shake when I try to walk to the kitchen. I have to see a specialist next week, and I'm taking a lot of medicine. But when I look at Leo sleeping in his bed, I don't feel that shadow of fear anymore. I know that I've closed the doors. Jesus told me that he is with me, even in the laundry. And today, when I sat down to fold a load of Leo's clothes very slowly, one t-shirt at a time, I didn't feel like it was a chore. I felt like I was doing something holy. I found one of those green dinosaur socks that had been on the floor when I fell. I held it for a minute, and I just thanked him. I'm 35 years old, and I've been a Christian most of my life. But I didn't know anything until last Thursday. I didn't know that our lives are a battlefield, and the things we bring home are the territory we're giving away. I want people to know that your discernment isn't just a feeling, it's a gift. If your spirit feels heavy about something, don't talk yourself out of it. Don't worry about being rude or being weird. Just get it out. Your peace is worth more than any antique or any blessing that comes with a shadow. I'm sitting in my living room right now. It's Monday, July 13th. The sun is hitting that same spot on the hardwood floor, and it's still hot outside. But my house feels light. It feels clean. And I know that the next time I stand up to fold clothes, I'm not just a mom doing a job. I'm a gatekeeper. I'm finally seeing the truth. That's the line that's going to stay with me from Heather's story. It's such a simple way to describe something so massive. The idea that we spend most of our lives looking at the world through a fog, and it takes a moment like the one she had to finally see the threads attached to the things we own. Heather's account lines up with a few others in how she describes that truth garden, but the part about the 6 gifts, that's new. It complicates things for me. It makes me look at the shelf behind me and wonder what's sitting there that I've stopped noticing. But what I'm left sitting with is a question about the words we use. Heather used words like antennas and anchors and weight. She's a mom from Wisconsin, and those are the words from her world. And I can't stop wondering whether someone from a totally different background, maybe an artist or a scientist, would describe the exact same moment in completely different words, or if they'd land on the same feeling of weight. I genuinely don't know. That's what I'll be listening for in the next story. If this story raised a question for you about the words, about what happened, about how you describe the same moment, I want to hear it. It's the kind of thing that shapes how I listen to the next account. So please tell me. If something like what Heather described has happened to you, or if you felt that weight in your own home, I'd really like to hear about it. Your story might be the one that helps the next person feel a little less alone.